And welcome back to Dollars and Dragons. Today I have with me James Haeck. If you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience.
Hey there. Thanks for having me on the show. My name's James. I'm a tabletop game designer who's been doing this for the last 8 years or so. And my work has included Tal'Dorei, the Tal'Dorei campaign setting, Call of the Netherdeep, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and most recently work with Ghostfire Gaming on Pirates of the Ethereal Expanse and Raider's Guide to Valaka in their Grim Hollow dark fantasy setting. I also recently started a YouTube channel where I talk to you about the things that I've learned over the past nearly 10 years of game design and all of the fantastic mentors that I've had along the way, people like Chris Perkins and Wolfgang Bauer, and essentially tell you how to do this thing that I do, because we need more people doing great game design in this field.
Yeah, I just want to say, we're going to talk about this at the end of the podcast, but I just want to say, you have such a great radio voice for YouTube videos. So it's going to go great. It's going to go great for you, I
Thank
think.
you. I can only assume it's genetic because my dad is a news reporter here in Seattle.
Wow. Okay. What type of news does he do?
So Corwin Haeck has been on Como News Radio for the past 20 years. He's going to retire in a year or two, but he he never gave me any voice training or anything like that. If I ever had any voice training, it was when I was studying to be an actor. A dream which I'm very, very happily kind of having rolled into my love of game mastering. But yeah, no, I think I just grew up around that sort of velvety voice, and if anything, I picked up a few things along the way.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's sending me on a trip. I probably listened to your dad on the radio then. That's
yeah, probably.
Funny. Yeah. Okay. Wow. But I think there's definitely an element of that theater kid to becoming a game master.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of us out there, all these theater kids that didn't pursue acting or because of a lot of different reasons, but but they still like to get on stage more or less.
Oh yeah, we're all a bunch of weirdos here. No matter how popular, no matter how mainstream tabletop RPGs get, at the core of it, it will always be a bunch of theater kid weirdos who like to tell stories about their characters falling in love.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk about when you started and that story, because I think that's fairly interesting. Because it's different than a lot of other people. Because I'll let you tell the story. But how did you get started in the industry as a designer?
Absolutely. Well, you've actually you've touched on a topic I've been thinking of a lot lately because of the next YouTube video I'm making, which talks about the kind of lack of a stable career path within this industry. Right? It's built on sand. One person will hack their way through the jungle, and then the jungle will close right up behind them. And so, what I'm going to describe to you as my start is not a path you can follow, beat for beat, but you can. I think if you're clever and self-motivated and lucky, because I was very lucky, you can take the broad strokes of this and use it to start your game design journey. I started by leaving home. I moved from Seattle to Orange, California for school. I was going to be an actor because I loved acting in high school. And Orange is by Anaheim, which is by LA, right? And I really wanted to play D&D with my fellow theater students. I really wanted to play D&D with actors, people who really got into the role play of the game as much as I did. And long story short, I did not find a really a D&D group like that until I was close to graduating. And while all that was going on, I was deeply frustrated and religiously following the D&D Next playtest for 5th edition. And I was on all the web forums. I was reading every playtest packet. I was all in on this because I had kind of burned out hard of 3rd edition, which I played in high school. None of us owned the 4th edition books. We all don't, Nothing against fourth edition. I think that's a great edition. I just never played it in high school. And the power gamers in my group made me hate playing D&D. And it was very fortunate that rather than breaking, the D&D Next playtest packet came out, and I was like, whoa, this legitimately solves all my problems, right? I have been very conditioned to like fifth edition from the start, and it remains one of my favorite RPGs. And so rather than run D&D with these people who got really into the role play and the characters and the motivations and the drama of it all, I wrote it down. I wrote my ideas down. I think I started watching Matt Colville videos around this time, and his love of classic 3-act adventures like The Cult of the Reptile God were influential to me. I wanted to make an adventure that had that classic structure. You know, with all of my with all of my college kid ego, I was like, I could do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
what's so hard about it? I can do that. And you know, and bit by bit, mistake after mistake, I did. That adventures on the DM's Guild now. It's called The Temple of Shattered Minds. And ultimately, when fifth edition came out, I had built this unpublished body of work. I had been, and it more or less looked like 5e. There were a lot of, you know, things that in the years since I've learned were incorrect or misunderstandings or stuff like that. But when 5e came out, there were a lot of companies scrambling to make third-party content for it, even though the 5e SRD did not exist yet. This is not a problem any of you will face, because now the OGL crisis has kind of ended in what might be described as the best possible way. You need never fear for a 5e SRD ever again. So, you know, we did the dubiously legal thing of using the third edition SRD to cover this new fifth edition stuff we were making. And I just basically stacked my portfolio with this unpublished work and went off and submitted to it. I submitted to design contests like Kobold Press's Monarch of the Monsters and Lethal Lairs, to Paizo's RPG Superstar, and ultimately to this wasn't a contest, but EN World needed an editor for their upcoming 5e zine Insider. EN numeral 5 IDER. It was a very funny little title. I loved it. And I can only assume no one else applied to that job because with my resume stacked full of unpublished stuff, a mix between 5e and Pathfinder. I mean, it was like, I have no idea why anyone decided to take a chance on me there, but Russ over at EnWorld did. And basically for the next 4 years, I received open call submissions and edited and sometimes wrote my own material for 5e in a very small iterative way, right? These articles were about 2,000 words. And so each one was a fairly bite-sized piece of design for me to sink my teeth into. I met a lot of great people over there. James Intricasso's first published RPG piece was in that magazine. He and I met very early on, and now look at the guy. He's helming the MCDM RPG, right? There's all sorts of amazing design that came out of that era. And as that era went on, I continued adding it to my portfolio, to my resume. And this is where another great stroke of luck comes in. Maybe the greatest one in my whole career is that while I was scrolling through Twitter, ignoring my Theater History 2 lecture one day, I saw that Geek and Sundry, which I'd only just discovered about 2 or 3 months prior through the fiasco episode of Tabletop, had put out a call for interns, editorial interns. And I was like, well, I can do that. I don't know where they are, but maybe they'll let me work remote. How could this play out? And looking back on it, it was a very strange thing. I have no idea why they put out this sort of frantic call for interns on Twitter that just had their like info@geekandsundry.com email address. But regardless of why, I sent in that email, I sent in that resume, and I got an interview, and I got the job as an editorial intern. And with the benefit of hindsight, I know exactly why. It's because just a few months ago, they launched this little thing called Critical Role, and they saw D&D publishing on my resume. and they desperately needed someone on their web editorial staff who knew how to cover D&D, who knew how to talk about D&D, who knew what people liked about D&D and how to get new people hyped about it. And that led to me meeting Matthew Mercer, and that led to working on the original Tal'Dorei campaign setting in 2017. And that book led to Waterdeep Dragon Heist with Wizards, which led to working with D&D Beyond. And it all, it's all one snowball rolling down a mountain. And sometimes you'll hit snags and stuff like that, but it's the way to find success in any creative industry is work really, really hard in obscurity for no accolades for as long as it takes, get lucky, and then make as much use of your 15 minutes of fame as you can to build up as solid a reputation as a hard worker who can always be relied upon. And then even if the fame vanishes into 2 years of NDAs and working on a book before you can finally announce something again, even if that goes away, you will always have that professional reputation of being someone who can get the job done, and that means that the work will never dry up.
Wow, there's so much good advice in there. I just want to. There are so many people that I think can attribute either their success or their start to Matt Colville videos now. Because that was, I would say that Matt Colville is at least 30% responsible for my success as a pro GM, because that's how I learned how to GM, was running the game videos. I watched 100 of those motherfuckers, and then I started to GM like nonstop for a while, and then I eventually said, what if I just did this for money instead? And then that happened to work out, and things have been going well so far. So if I ever meet the man, I'm gonna let him know that he was the first instructional book on me starting my career as a pro GM.
Matt Colville is fantastic, and I know we'll talk about the YouTube channel that I've started later, but my most of my inspirations were either writers I was working with, and if not them, it was people on YouTube. It was people like Matt Colville, but it was also game design. What's the word I'm looking for here? Essayists, I suppose. Game design essayists on YouTube who were not in the tabletop space at all. I think that the greatest game design essayist working on YouTube is Mark Brown with his Game Maker's Toolkit channel, and that channel is deeply angled towards video games. And I was able to look at that and think, okay, well, I can translate some of these design precepts he's talking about to tabletop work. But one of the main reasons why I started a YouTube channel is to create something of that level of depth and analytical skill, specifically for the art of tabletop design, so that people wouldn't have to go through the work of translating ideas from the language of video games into the the cognate but different language of tabletop games.
That's one of those things where I think I initially think I got into game design because of RPG Maker when I was a teenager. I was a very young person who was just like, hey, I can make these little sprite characters, and like then you go and fight people. And I think it's actually a big market now where people actually produce full-blown like Steam games and stuff. But that was like my first introduction, was like the intersection of doing both like RPG Maker, and then also when I was doing my fantasy novel writing and stuff like that when I was a teenager. And eventually they coalesced into tabletop when I was introduced to tabletop. So it's funny where we all come from. And I think one of the unique things about tabletop is that because currently, like with the culture and the economics of it, most people are part-time for a long time before they make it. Therefore, everyone generally has a very interesting story of where they came from in like a very different background compared to, I think, a lot of different occupations. Like when you meet electricians, generally, they have been electricians since they could work, or any other like profession like that. If you meet a nurse, generally, they've been a nurse for a really long time, or they went right into school to do it. Whereas tabletop, because of the economics of it, and like as you described, it's such an amateur market for a long time until you can score some of these paying gigs. It's definitely different.
I this might simply be my own cognitive bias at work here, but I think there are enormous similarities between the art of, or between the business of being a tabletop game designer and the business of being an actor. There is sort of this constant freelancing, constant hunt for the next job, right? You're constantly auditioning, or you are constantly looking for an open call, or something like that, and there are a lot of little regional theaters out there. There are a lot of little what we'll call them AA level publishers out there, but only a fragment of a single percent of all the people working in that field are ever going to hit stardom, are going to hit Hollywood, right? Or going to hit Wizards of the Coast, or whatever other AAA TTRPG publishers are out there. And even then, only a fragmentary percent of those people are going to be, superstars. Chris Perkins is a kind of once in a lifetime event. I can name on, one hand easily the number of people who are as recognizable within this industry as he is. There's like Chris, the two Matts, Mercer and Coville.
Mm-hmm.
There's Monty Cook, I would say. And just like with the big Hollywood entertainment industry, the people who are celebrated at that level are overwhelmingly cishet white dudes. And oh my God, sorry, I'm I'm just wandering down a rabbit hole of what I consider to be just and unjust in this industry, and how you've got to stop me, or else I will get wildly off
No, I
topic here.
will. No, we'll go down this rabbit hole. That's fine. As long as you want to talk about it, we'll talk about it.
I don't know. I feel awkward talking about this because I don't have much of a solution here, right? Because it's like asking, well, how do you fix celebrity in Hollywood? Girl, I don't know.
Yeah.
This is a complex problem wrapped up in the infinite facets of money and public prestige and the whims of pop culture, and there is precious little we can do to purposefully impact that, other than support people of marginalized identities when they crop up, right? Because even if society at large is not going to give them their flowers, we as people who love what is good about tabletop RPGs, who love this medium, we at least can celebrate all of the cool trans folk and people of color and et cetera, when they create fantastic work.
I think part of that, and I've seen this perhaps firsthand in my first foray, and those who listen to my podcast or have talked to me know that I always do not recommend doing what I did for my first book, which was go to Kickstarter, have a big goal, and then have a big team, and like all this stuff that's very, I guess, I want to use the word ostentatious, but maybe it's just like very, very large. And going like the route of slowly building is much more safe for a number of reasons. And I would like to, I had the privilege to do that because I was able to, in some parts, when I made a career switch, I had a reserve of financial ability to do that, which just isn't possible for most people. And it is a privilege, in my opinion, to be a project lead for the book that I'm working on, and working with all these professionals of very diverse backgrounds. A lot of that, though, is important for different reasons than people would suspect. And for me, it was about telling as diverse a queer story as I could, instead of just a white queer story, which is what it would have been if I had written it myself, because it's based on my homebrew campaign that I ran, right? So that's where it initially started. And a lot of that stuff, because it was better suited to people of different backgrounds, I handed off a lot of stuff and I just gave them a prompt. Like, I would like you to write about this. I would like you to write about that. Like when I handed off the Whisperborn to Kiana Shaw, I was like, I shouldn't be writing about this particular sort of people who are, different than humans in almost every single way. I think I want that to be someone who has the narrative chops to do this, but then also is going to do it in such a way that we're very cognizant of the the tricky subjects in this that I would not have a perspective on as a white person.
How did you go about making your first project? And this is this the Vineyard RPG?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you go about doing your first project as something of this scale? Because you're right. It's something that, by the conventional wisdom that I would give most people, a terrible mistake to really swing for the fences like that and gather a huge team and do all of that as your first published product. But clearly, it's the sort of thing that's it's the exception to the rule.
It is 100%. By the way, I'm fucking eating this up because I feel like I'm on D&D Beyond right now. Like James Haeck asking me questions. But I would say that so initially this is what happened. I was working for Jasmine Buhler as
Mm-hmm.
her content manager for a while, and at the time I was asking her like, how should I go about getting gigs, because I'm having trouble figuring out like how this ecosystem works. And she said, well, you're good at running projects. Why don't you just run your own project? And I said, okay. and then that's like sort of what stirred it. But at the same time, because I'm used to creating, or I should say, I had the confidence to run a big project because I have done big things in the past, and like as far as like managed a lot of people, and I've managed a lot of deliverables in a professional environment before. And that is definitely a skill set that people overlook when they get into tabletop, because at least my observation is that people who haven't done product management or anything like that just don't understand like how much work it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
But I already understood that going into it. The other thing that I managed to do was I managed to speak with and recruit the right people who could uplift me enough in exchange for me giving them work. And that is the core of the Vineyard RPG, like being successful up to this point. And we'll deliver next year because of that. Because I had people who, like, for instance, like M. Ebel, who was my co-creator, someone who I had a little bit of professional experience with because I got on a call and I had hired them to consult on the homebrew campaign before it became a book. And then we had a good experience working together with One Night Strahd. And then, I brought M on board to be the co-creator of this because M really liked the concept. And M honestly opened up every single door for me because everyone was like, oh, co-writer of the Rime of the Frost Maiden, like, okay, this is a serious project. And that really just created a lot of momentum for me. A lot of the other people who now are in the leadership roles, now that M had to move on to achieve a full-time job with Camp Banks, so happy for them, but have really done a lot of work for me, has been people who I thought would be good for the role. I gave them a shot, and they either were really good for the role, or I had to move on to somebody else to like kind of take up that role. And it takes some doing, and there's a lot of my time and effort and money that has been used in a way that I wouldn't say is a mistake necessarily, but it's used inefficiently. And that is something that, because I've never produced a book before, is one of the great dangers of just doing it on your own or just doing it for the very first time. Is I don't have a process like Ghostfire Games or Wizards of the Coast in which they have a proven process of like, hey, this is how it works. And I had to like kind of figure that out. So
I think it's very interesting you bring that up. Because when I was brought onto Ghostfire Gaming, there was no process.
oh shit.
It was a new company that was founded by three blokes in Melbourne, Australia, and most of them were business people. Our CEO, Jordan Gibson, who has since left the company, was a veteran of a Fortune 500 banking company. And so he had certain expectations and certain insights into the art of business, and he liked D&D. Right, Grim Hollow is kind of a massive effort at publishing his own dark fantasy campaign setting from his home game that has since taken on a life of its own with new creatives like Ben Byrne over at Ghostfire, who, like yourself, was a pro GM before he was a creative director and a podcast host. But when Ghostfire hired people like me and Sean Merwin and Joe Rasso and Ben Byrne, all people who would run the creative show, they did not have any sort of systems of production in place, except for maybe the systems of production used for getting illustrations. And even then, people like Suzanne Helmy and Ona Christensen are such forces of nature, absolute titans of the ability to wrangle artists. I don't think there was so much a process for that, uh, like institutionally, as there was those two women just kicking ass. So I get there, and this led to a very stressful first year at Ghostfire. And I can say that because the CEO that led to that stress is no longer there. Um, they had enormous ambition to create a 100-page, an 80-page monthly release of 5e Adventure every single month in a Paizo Adventure Path style format.
Holy shit.
Uh,
Go on.
yeah, and if I'd had any sense, I would have said you're crazy. But kind of the story of my career is not having any sense and burning the candle at both ends, and then drilling a third wick in and burning the candle at that third end also to make it work. Often to the detriment of other aspects of my life, something which I have kind of dedicated myself to no longer doing. Now
Yeah.
now that I don't have to hustle quite so hard. Um,
Yeah.
all that to say, I suddenly found myself as a project lead, right? The year 2021 was the year when I went from being a freelance writer to, more than anything, a freelance project lead. I did it on Call of the Netherdeep with Wizards, my first project that I led. I did it with the Fables series through Ghostfire, both Citadel of the Unseen Sun and Pirates of the Ethereal Expanse. And I have and Tal'Dorei Reborn, which I co-led, and it just keeps that is a skill set that I have developed because I had to, because that first Fables, Citadel of the Unseen Sun, was such a shambles because I did not know what I was doing. Right, I was thrown into a situation where it was sink or swim, and I managed to swim, but it was not it was not easy. So I had to go out and I had to buy books on management. Sorry, this is going to be an audio podcast. I don't know why I'm showing an image here. I pulled out a book about management. And from there, I realized just how rare this managerial skill is within this industry. Because this industry is so diffuse, I guess, because everyone is a freelancer, because there are basically no institutions other than maybe Wizards and Paizo and Monte Cook Games. Everything really is built on a foundation of sand. And so institutional knowledge is hard to come by. There's no sort of set knowledge pool for TTRPGs. Institutional organization is hard to come by. And so the only thing I could do was look back to what my experience with Call of the Netherdeep was and try and emulate it. Try and emulate the style that Wizards of the Coast takes with their books and tailor it, somewhat to my own preferences, to my own artistic styles, but ultimately play it very safe and only start branching out as I become more confident in that. And what that looks like is just as, did you describe this on the show or before the show? It's what you told to me, which was you give people their assignments, you set them free, and maybe you ask them to collaborate a little bit. Hey, feel free to collaborate when you put them in a Discord together. All of these stories are going to be tied together, so go talk to each other, find ways to connect them. And then people will come back at the deadline or a little over it and be like, I've been working on 4 projects right now. I got it done. Like, okay. That collaboration that I was hoping for didn't necessarily happen, but can't fault you for that. I gave you a huge assignment. I'm treading water as it is right now. So, okay, let's take what we got and let's bash it into shape and let's make a product out of it. And I truly feel that with Wizards' relentless release schedule right now, that feeling that I had when working on Citadel of the Unseen Sun is very much the prevailing feeling at Wizards right now. Not only are they releasing something like 8 books a year now, which compared to 2014 boggles the mind, putting out the revised core rule books for the rules refresh in 2024. And everything happens so much over there. And everything happens so much for me, this one kind of wayward, confused project lead over at Ghostfire who eventually, through a lot of errors, a lot of unforced errors, kind of figured out what they were doing and how to run a book with some modicum of skill and professionalism.
Yeah. I totally feel that, and I'm going through all that pain, and I'm glad, that is so, that makes me feel so good. Uh that you suffer similarly to me, and you have, like, I'm not alone in this. I totally understand what you mean. And I feel like if we go back briefly to, like, acting, right? Show
hmm
business.
hmm
You are the showrunner, right? Just like I
hmm
am the showrunner. And if we
hmm
look at it from that lens, like our continued vision, just like a director or a showrunner, you are basically making sure all of the pieces connect. Because if you're a showrunner, you still need directors and you still need different writers for each episode and so on and so forth.
hmm
But it's got to overall connect together in order for it to be a great product. Because otherwise,
hmm
it's just a bunch of disjointed stuff with the production cycle. So I think in my mind, at least from what I know of show running, it feels like that is my role more than anything else. Even if I am writing a good chunk of it, it's to make
hmm
sure that I am connecting everything and making sure the vision makes sense.
hmm Absolutely. That really is it. And I've fought really hard to maintain the ability to do ground level creative work amidst that. It has been really hard because the work of being a project manager is immense. It is so immense, especially when you're dealing with big, 2 to 500 page projects, right? Because Fables was essentially a 500 page book that we produced every 6 months, which, when you say it that way, sounds hog bonkers.
Yeah,
But even if it's a normal size book, which you're producing over 2 years, like Saga of the Seasons or Raider's Guide to Valaka, which we also did at Ghostfire, keeping a team of writers engaged with each other, engaged with material, and keeping them on target with the goals of the project uh, is so much work. It basically leaves no time for you to do any of the actual molding of the clay yourself. Uh, I found that while working on projects like that, I had to give myself the joy of writing at the very beginning of the project when I was creating setting Bibles and story Bibles, and maybe the barest bit of introductory text. And then at the end, when I had to take these freelance manuscripts I received and uh, do editing or, in some cases, rewrites on those manuscripts. And when I say rewrites, I don't mean to say I took a writer's manuscript and I said, haha, I've wasted their time now to rewrite this thing. No, no. When you're working on a project like this, especially with work for hire writers in the way that Wizards and most other RPG companies, and I emphasize companies here, work, is that sometimes the goal of the writer, despite your best work as a project manager, does not align perfectly with the goals of the project. And so you can either kick it back to the writer, and I often do, and say, "Hey, I need this to be changed so that it hits this target or it emphasizes this theme." And if you've got a great writer, they will be like, "Oh, I see exactly what you mean," and they send you a perfect manuscript. And if you're working with a writer who is not, a 1 in a million wunderkind, they will try their best and it won't quite hit the mark again. You'll be like, okay, well, I know what I want. I know what the project needs, so I'll just do this. And it's why it's good to have, creative project managers who are also writers, because it means you are not so much at the mercy of communicating your ideas kind of ephemerally, psychically, to another person.
yeah, I agree with, like, that. That makes so much sense to me how your process worked. And then I have Fables pulled up, and I'm looking at the credits page right now. So that's what you'd call, like, head of Fables. So you're listed there, and then story design, and those two roles. My question then is, so I've done something for my team where I have a narrative designer and a mechanical designer, and
Hmm
I've just made sure to pick these two people who align so well with my vision that I don't have to question what they're doing.
hmm
Have you ever explored that sort of design at Wizards or elsewhere, and how does that differ from what you do now?
Mm. I would say that I have not yet met the people who I can do that with. I've met people who come close. I've met people who do it for elements of a project. But I have not yet met someone whose mind and mine are so perfectly in tune when it comes to this creative process that I can say, I've not met someone who I can pilot a Jaeger with, right? I've not met someone who I'm drift compatible with. And it will be a beautiful thing if and when that happens. But until then, I will be more like, I'll be the eye in the sky. I'll be on the headset, and I will be guiding. I will be guiding the mix from above.
Yeah, I have this internal deadline, this looming deadline in my head because like these two leads that I currently have, Nat and Kiana, are so fucking good with me on creating
Mm.
stuff that if like I need to make enough money to hire them because they're gonna get fucking hired and they should get
Yes,
hired.
yes, that's the real thing. That's kind of why I feel like I have not found that person yet, is because the people who I came up with in this industry, absolute titans of game design like James Introcaso, Celeste Konowich, folks like that. One of two things has happened to them: either they have been gainfully employed, and MCDM has James, Kobold Press has Celeste, or they've left the industry. This is a hard industry, and even if you're great at it, most people don't deserve all the shit they have to put up with in order to find a modicum of success here. And some of them go to other kinds of tabletop games, like my pal Lisa Penrose went to Ravensburger to work on board games. But some of them are just like, I can't take this anymore. I would rather work a mundane job and have my creative work be a hobby for me than put up with all of the bullshit that goes on in this industry. Both, having to package little bits of your soul and sell them on a deadline. That's one thing. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone should do that. But also just the endless drama and infighting and call outs and churn on RPG social media that has kind of evolved since 2013. It wears a person down. And so I actually think that the vast majority of people would be happier doing creative work as a hobby, or and I don't know, the word hobby feels insufficient, as a side project, as a project that their livelihood does not rely upon, right? Something that they can have a day job to do, and then something that really fulfills their artistic dreams, rather than torture themselves, essentially going through this meat grinder of an industry. Where was I going with this? Oh, right. And it's that after that sort of group of people who I came up with have either left or been hired, I did not see a very big pool of designers coming up below them. And I mean this very particularly in the field of third-party 5e compatible design, because that is the majority of the work I do, even if I would like to continue branching out into other forms of role-playing games. A lot of my work right now that is unpublished is kind of in that field, because I have fallen so deeply in love with games like Blades in the Dark and Alice is Missing, and have been so deeply inspired by those. But my career is in 5th edition, and so my work as a project manager means that I must find people who are skilled in the craft of creating things for 5th edition. And Wizards has been hiring a lot. Their team is bigger than it's been in decades, and they're using freelancers less and less. And I was really beginning to fear that I would never find people who inspired me in the same way as my peers did when I was coming up. And to that I say, thank God for Big Bad Con 2022, because if I had not been at the POC meet and greet at that particular convention, I never would have met people like Lexi McQueen, who absolutely blew my socks off with a manuscript that they wrote for a yet unannounced Ghostfire project. So many people who I met at Big Bad Con 2022 are working on this yet unannounced Ghostfire project. And here's the thing: a lot of these people aren't there yet. Their work is rough. It's unpolished. They need a lot more fundamentals before they before they're ready to, submit to Wizards or something like that. But the thing about all of these people, these dozens of people who I met through the POC Scholar program and stuff like that at Big Bad Con, is they have got not just this passion for TTRPGs, because we all have this passion, but they have a willingness to learn and take feedback and develop creatively, I think is shockingly rare. I think there are a lot of people out there who think that they are God's gift to tabletop games. Or, and I'm exaggerating here, but who at least think, I did something amazing in my home campaign and it will rock the world when I publish it. Wizards will be at my feet wanting this cool campaign thing that I've created. No, they won't. Like, respectfully, that is ego so enormous you don't even know it's ego. And I have had that ego, and I have learned to temper that ego, because no one wants that. You want that, right? You want to put that into the world, and unless you have a great deal of reason for other people to want that in the world, you are taking a very big gamble self-publishing it, and you are going to have a very hard time getting a publisher to publish it. So when I find these new designers who, I'm sure have big dreams, and I'm sure have projects like that they think will change the world, and who knows, maybe they will. Their chops aren't there yet, and so the huge defining trait of these people is that they are willing to learn, and they're willing to take feedback, and they're willing to iterate. They're willing to do small work, a lot of small work. They're going to take draft after draft after draft of notes from me. And I'm going to take the time to give them draft after draft after draft of notes and revisions. And they are not going to get tired of it. They're not going to take it personally. They're going to work until the project is polished. And over the course of that work and that mentorship, they're going to come up with something really fantastic. I'm pat my own self on the back a little bit here, because I don't see a lot of other people in the industry doing that. It's something very rare. I've only received that mentorship once, and it was when I was working with Chris Perkins and James Introcaso on Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Chris was leading that project. James and I were both, fairly untested freelancers in the sort of AA or AAA space. We'd done a lot of stuff for things like Kobold Press and groups like them, but we had never done anything approaching the magnitude of a Wizards of the Coast hardcover. There were just the two of us, and every Friday, Chris sat down with us for half an hour, and we went over our drafts together. We looked at what worked, and we looked at what didn't. And for the entire, 24 weeks or so that we worked on that book, we got that very personalized feedback from Chris, identifying all of our mistakes, big and small, and praising where we got. And I think that if I had not gotten that mentorship, I would not be half the designer I am now, because it was so early on. It was so fundamental to me. And that sort of mentorship, that close work, is the type of design lead I want to be. I want to emulate that for every designer that ever works with me, because I think they have creative ideas and creative potential that I will never have. In this arena, I have certain knowledge of the proper syntax, of the way that a game works, of all of these highly technical details that will help them turn their creative brilliance into something actionable, something gameable, and not just something that is kind of ephemeral and intangible out there that people can't actually play a game with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's honestly, like, all of the stuff that you're describing is why I hired Nat. Who I found is that person who, and this is how I describe Nat to people. So and they know I describe them this way, but like, Nat is the person that if I ask them a question about a game book that they read 2 years ago, they'll tell you what chapter the answer is in, and they'll
Nat
go and
sounds like
find
a
it.
god.
Nat, I'm just, if this podcast comes out and you're a publisher, you need to hire Nathaniel Kryman. But just to anybody listening, but like, yeah, Nat has just that particular type of a particular type of neurodivergence where um, very incredibly good with mechanics and just memorizing that sort of thing, and also meeting our vision with the narrative to mechanically create it, and is very good about like me just asking Nat once in a while, like, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking. Is there a creature anywhere in 5e that already does this? And then Nat will be like, I'll get back to you. And then like an hour later, it will be like, this is the creature, and this is the skill set that you're looking for, and this is the language that is used in this particular
Mm.
type of mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
and can just do that just very quickly, and it's really incredible, and it's a very particular type of person that everyone knows in their tabletop games. However, like if you play with people enough, like you know who that person is. But if they can get as well the communication and the professionalism and like the a bit of like the other soft skills that you're talking about in working with teams, they could become really great game designers. But I think that people like that in large part that I have met, anecdotally, they just don't develop those soft skills like Nat has. And it's
Mm-hmm.
very difficult for them to work with other people because they are very like engineered brain in that they're like, this is the right answer, and like
Mm.
aren't very good at communicating that in a way that works well with creatives.
The key to a successful relationship, whether it's romantic, platonic, or professional, is to find a partner whose neurodivergencies complement your own.
Absolutely. I'm the
And no, go
I'm
ahead.
the I was just gonna say I'm the opposite side of autistic as Nat. We're both a little bit
Mm-hmm.
autistic.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we just he's the math autistic and I'm like the creative autistic.
Yep.
So
And
yeah.
if on the off chance you're listening to this podcast, you're not neurodivergent, one, I doubt it. But two, read that as idiosyncrasies,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, we're just puzzle pieces that fit well together. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And that's kind of like the thing that I was thinking about when I was deciding like post Kickstarter, okay, I've got all this money, how do I get to the goal? How do I get to where we need to be where we finish the book? And I realized I'm doing too much shit. Like I have
Mm.
too much to do, just what you're talking about, like with you and your first project that you were lead on, or the first one you did for Ghostfire, right? And I had to figure out like who are these people on the team who I know that are going to be able to deliver to me on time and complement my weaknesses. And
Mm.
that is such a difficult thing to find. It's very rare that you be in that opportunity because a lot of people are either like unknowingly thinking that they're better at something than they are
Mm.
because they haven't received feedback like you're talking about,
Mm.
and they haven't received that like cold hard truth, from like, hey, this is the design intent, and like you're not meeting the mark, you're not meeting it, and this is what a more refined product looks like for this genre or whatever game system. They haven't received that, and how can they know, right? So it's just like this dance, perhaps, in this professional space in which I need to see someone's raw work to be able to tell if they're going to work out or not.
Mm.
I can't see
Mm-hmm.
their edited stuff a lot of the time because like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the times these line editors like yourself and like our Hannah Roses out there, our uh our Laura's, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, Laura
Uh
Hirschbrenner.
yeah, Hertzbrenner.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So those editors can sometimes that's the quandary of like being a project lead, is like sometimes editors are hiding the deficiencies of their freelance writers, right? Which is
Mhm.
great because they're putting out a better product, but at the same time I need to know that like when I'm coming in, and I just, unless I see a first draft from you, I'm not going to know.
Right. And that's something that was a hard lesson for me to learn uh, when I first saw Dragon Heist in print. The lesson I'm speaking of is that tabletop RPG game books, when they are made by a team like this, are not a creative exhibition. They are a product. And that means that the publisher wants to put out a good product. And so the relationship between writers and publishers in tabletop games is extremely different between writers and publishers in novels or something like that. It's much more like I mean, think of yourself as working on like a Marvel movie, right? Your Kevin Feige is going to have final determination of how this fits into the master plan. So even though you have a lot of creative stake in what's being created, and you may even feel a lot of creative pride, you are really going to have to let go at the end of the day if you are working for a publisher. If you're working as an indie, I mean, go wild. You can do whatever you want, and you can take all the risk yourself, and you can reap all the benefits yourself. You might have a Stardew Valley on your hands. You might have an Undertale on your hands because you stayed true to your North Star. But you might also have, a total flop on your hands, or you might have an incredibly niche indie hit that, while it is universally beloved within that niche, it only sells 100 copies, right? Do you recoup the cost of the time you spent on it? And it's up to you to decide if that's a problem or not, right? Because if you are, like I said, one of those people for whom game design is more an avocation than your full-time job, if you have a stable means of supporting your livelihood outside of it, you can afford to make games that, quote unquote, flop, that find their niche appropriately. It just happens to be a very small niche. And that's the main reason why I said earlier that you should consider keeping your day job. Not because I think, and I say you not to you, our gracious host, but to, the very broad general you, because I don't mean to say that your game design is not good. I mean to say that it might not be makes $100,000 accessible. There's a
Yeah.
huge difference between creatively valuable
Hmm.
and marketable.
Oh yeah. It's oceans of difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, oceans of difference. And you can see that just even as an observer, like if you look at Kickstarters that are 5e and Kickstarters that are not
Mm-hmm.
in the game development scene.
Oh
And
my
you can,
God.
yeah, it's oceans of different.
And I will say this: they're not mutually exclusive. Creatively valuable and personal and marketable. Matt Colville somehow manages to make products that are fairly deeply personal to him and his sort of 80s centric kind of Gen X view of fantasy, which I say with love. Uh, and he makes $2 million on his Kickstarters for them. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's remarkable. It's incredible. Um, and I think very difficult to replicate because there's a lot of work that went into building the MCDM brand before that Kickstarter popped off and got its $2.1 million back in 2015 or whenever. If you are a single person indie and you do not have the immense install base that Matt Colville has, your highly personal indie darling will probably not raise $2.1 million on Kickstarter. But it might do enough for you to print the book. It might do enough for you to reach a couple of stretch goals. It might do enough to visualize your gaming dream in the physical real world, or even just in the digital PDF driven real world. And let that be enough. Find a way to temper that ego. Don't kill it, right? The ego is a good part. It's a natural balanced part of your psyche. But temper it and celebrate victories like that, because that, I mean, the joy you get from seeing your creation is the thing that will propel you to continue creating things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I always recommend the same advice that most people give. Then in that case, it's like sign up for Storytelling Collective, do a
Mm-hmm.
write your first adventure, put that out there.
That's Ashley Warren's masterclass, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
she's the best.
Yeah, Ashley's great. I love Ashley. I think that, putting out zines, like seeing if like you build a following and go from there, and like if people really like your stuff, then maybe you can go somewhere with it and you can partner with more people at your level, your peers, and then start to build teams that make sense for you, and then you just grow together. And that's
Mm-hmm.
really the thing that people need to start embracing, because there's how many people at Wizards? 100, right? And it's like 30 on the design team or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. It's like there's only so many jobs, right? From these big publishers. And even if they seem like they're publishing a lot, it's mostly like pushing out the freelancers. Well, Wizards is moving away from that. Then you look at every other publisher, it has to be freelancers a lot of the time,
Mm-hmm.
because they only have the income to support their employees with healthcare, because America
Mm-hmm.
is terrible. So um
Mm-hmm.
so they'll give you, three jobs for the price of one salary, when you
Mm-hmm.
work for most publishers, because that's unfortunately how the math works out a lot of the time. Um, but yeah,
Yeah. Um, well, I just want to briefly touch upon the topic of pay while we're here, because it's something that we've got to grapple with. Right, like even when you're working for a publisher, you have to consider, well, do I keep my day job or not? Do I try and freelance full time? Because if you do freelance full time, especially when you're just starting out, you will be constantly hustling. You will be doing a lot of work that does not pay because you're looking for new jobs.
Yeah.
That is the thing that I was scared of the most when I left full time at Ghostfire and went back to freelancing. Is, will I be spending all my time hustling for new work? And luckily, I've discovered I've reached a point where I don't have to do that as much. I have a sort of stability in reputation, notoriety, but that is only because I have been doing extremely visible work
Hmm.
for no fewer than 5 years. I am an utter anomaly. You should not base your plans off of my situation. You will be spending as a freelancer probably about a quarter to half of your time hunting for work. And that is a very challenging proposition because you want to find work that's worth your time. If you're writing for 3 cents a word in 2023, that's not worth your time. If you're a full timer, if you're a hobbyist and you have a means of supporting yourself, this unethical rate of 3 cents a word might be okay. I did a lot of 3 cents a word work when I was just starting out, and that was 2015.
Hmm.
It's a slightly different time, but I did a lot of 3 cent a word work because I was also a student. I was privileged enough to have a safety net. I was able to take underpaying work to build up a body of work that would get people to recognize me, get my work out there, and eventually lead to jobs that paid better. And actually, maybe at the end of the day, that's why I'm so insistent upon people not leaping into doing RPG work full time before they're ready, because a lot of the you got to pay your dues, just like an actor's got to pay their dues. You got to do summer stock, you got to do community theater, you got to do theater work that doesn't pay jack, so that you can get the experience, you can make the connections. And that feels kind of harsh to say, because I am very much in that sort of leftist drumbeat of, we should pay people fairly, we should have a good minimum wage, we should have universal healthcare, we should make sure that people don't suffer unduly because of the way that this society is constructed. But because of the society that we live in right now, because we have this capitalist system, because this is a situation, we can't delude ourselves into thinking everything will work out all right if I just chase a dream full tilt. You have to chase the dream intelligently. And there are ways of doing that. And I do believe in you that you can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've so I think it was, when did I accept that job? 2021. I accepted five words or 5 cents a word. And I think the market rate now is like the market standard is 10. There are still publishers very established publishers who have perhaps $1 million APs, $1 billion APs that they produce books for, that still pay under 10 cents a word, which I think is pretty criminal. But I just wonder, like, at what point do people like come to terms with that? And I remember receiving a lot of, I'll call it just flack or just doubts about me initially charging $40 for a PDF and $65 for a hardcover book. And now look at where the market is. Not even like 6 months later, everybody's at $60 books, because it's like impossible to sell $50 books anymore. And it's ludicrous that these people would have this expectation that inflation didn't happen in the last 20 years. So it's like, why are they charging $60 for books now? Well, my rent is 3 times it used to be.
Man,
So
I remember when AAA video games cost like $30,
uh-huh.
right? It's like, and now they cost 60 in USD, if not 70. And that's not, it's not always corporate greed. It can often be corporate greed, but
Yeah.
it isn't always. Sometimes it's just, the money is not worth what it was when you were 8 years old.
I think that a lot of people just in the industry, especially, or games in the hobbyist like space, because people are used to getting things as they would personally, they don't think about the people who
Mm-hmm.
need to make a living wage
Mm-hmm.
en route to them getting their book or them getting their game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's unfortunately how a lot of people in video games are treated as well,
Mm-hmm.
as companies lay off hundreds, thousands of people in order to meet their very unrealistic version of success, which is ever growing profits at the
Mhm.
expense of the labor that sold them the games in the first place by making great games.
Yes, exactly that. People make games, right? I want shorter games with worse graphics that cost more, and I'm not joking. Um, and I want smaller RPGs, homier art, and fewer pages that cost more, and I'm not joking. It's a hard industry, this one that we're in, and it's one that, just like video games, thrives on passion and can often vampirically feed on people's passion because in video games they really can look at the Bobby Koticks of the world and say, oh well, that guy's, how deeply can I swear here, that guy's a fuckhead, that guy will
Yes, yes,
that guy is bleeding people dry. These billion-dollar AAA video game studios who make more money than Hollywood, shall we say, right? The video game industry is bigger than Hollywood. There is absolutely corporate shareholder level greed on an unbelievable scale happening there. But when it comes to tabletop games, I don't think I can really use that same line. I think it's just the industry, as big as it's gotten, as large as Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons looms with its Baldur's Gate 3 AAA games and its Honor Among Thieves Hollywood movies. If you set that remarkable outlier aside, this is still very much a hobbyist industry.
hmm
Even our AA studios like Paizo and Monte Cook Games and Evil Hat and stuff like that. I mean, they are the margins are just razor thin,
hmm
and I don't know what the solution to that problem is, but I want people to continue making good games because the future of this hobby depends on it. The future of a hobby that is not highly corporatized depends on it. I adore D&D, but its corporate underpinning has always made me uncomfortable. And it is a devil who I will dance with out of my love for that game. But you must be aware that it is the devil who you have danced with.
yeah, yeah. I think a lot of that is really just like it's the devil, and unfortunately, it's the devil that pays. Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's what we have to deal with in order to reach an audience.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time, because introducing a brand new game system to someone is a big ask for a customer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
And
wish it
it's
weren't, but it is.
And I think in some ways the board game industry does this a lot better. And that's something that we could probably take some lessons from, perhaps, from the board game industry, because that's a market that is used to buying a
Mm.
game, playing it once or twice, putting it on the shelf, and never playing again. And they're
Mm-hmm.
okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas tabletop, we get into like the RPG, like everyone expects now a Baldur's Gate 3 level of depth in
Mm-hmm.
their tabletop games. They're expecting
Mm-hmm.
like a Baldur's Gate 3 whenever they pick it up, and I'm gonna play this motherfucker for like 6 years, and this
Mm-hmm.
$50 is gonna stretch 6 years. So it's like it's unrealistic expectations on the consumer's part, I think, and part of that is perhaps education. And then for my part, in like for what I'm doing with my studio, I want to personalize and actually bring these designers to the forefront if I can, and continuously talk about these economic issues that we face. And I
I
hope
I
to.
want shorter campaigns with worse players and more prep work, and I'm not joking. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, continue. Please continue.
yeah. No, you're right on the money. Like I honestly, I think a lot of it is like, how do I now? I know that Ghostfire has like discontinued like what we can call like the meat grinder of the production cycle that you dealt with, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like I'm looking at next year, once we ship the core book for Vineyard, we are looking at 2-3 adventures, maybe once a quarter. In that it's like 15 to 20,000 words of a PDF that we send out
Mm-hmm.
to people, and that funnels more people in to buy the core book potentially. And that's the business model I'm trying out. Who knows if it's gonna fucking work? Like,
Mm-hmm.
who knows if it's gonna work? Because the idea for me is someone will pay $5 to $10 as a lot on a loss leader, like an adventure PDF to just try something out. And if they like it, they might buy the full book because they want more of that same sort of material, or they might buy like more adventures.
Mm-hmm.
But like it's so difficult, and it's like fraught with so many dead ends potentially. If you try any new product, if you're not paid back or you're not breaking even in the first year, my friend Dot was telling me that like that's how they project things at Kobo Press is like we need to make back or break even with this book in the first year, or we're not going to make something like this again
Mm-hmm.
because they can't
Mm-hmm.
financially. They have only so much runway
Mm-hmm.
in their business. So that's kind of the thing that I'm looking at is like, am I going to make $100,000 on Vineyard RPG by 2025? And if
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, I'm never going to touch Vineyard again. Like it'll be done. Whatever
Mm-hmm.
work I've done on it, I'll just put it on the shelf. It's over. Do something else.
I'm working on a script right now for the YouTube channel that talks about getting into publishing like this, and I've sourced a lot of quotes from a variety of people, namely Chris Perkins, who has a lot of interesting insights on this matter. His work brought him up through Dungeon magazine, and eventually became the editor of Dragon.
Hmm.
And then was hired by TSR, who folded within the year and went to Wizards of the Coast, and he's continued along that path. But he talked about the nature of publishing a little bit, um, and I don't know how much of this quote is really relevant here, but I want to say this. Uh, he says, when I write something, I'm going to write exactly what the publisher wants. And I'm paraphrasing there, but here comes the quote. What are they missing? That may be a weird way of looking at writing. On the one hand, I'm writing because I enjoy it, but I am writing for other people. This isn't a vanity project. I'm creating something to sell to others. And that means it needs to have the things that they want. That drives a lot of our storytelling at Wizards of the Coast. We don't see ourselves as a vanity press. We're not doing these books for us. We're doing these books for the fans. If we don't think a story is going to resonate with them, we don't do it.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting quote from Chris because like I think the general tenor in like the market is that Wizards of the Coast is like the vanilla ice cream shop,
Uh,
which it has to be, right? Because it is it's the well, they're the in and out. They have three things on the menu. Like because that's what sells and like they just do that very well, right? So that's a very interesting thing, and I wonder about like the perspective of like a Chris Perkins who's like looking at the future of D&D and like what are people
mhm.
missing and what do they want that's not going to alienate our massive player base. I think it's a difficult question. It's a difficult position to be in.
It's an incredibly hard position to be in. I really have a lot of respect for the creative team of Wizards trying to figure out what the hell they do now. Because this is usually around the time, we're well past the time that most editions of D&D have run aground. The sales have dried up. They need to to release a brand new edition in order to keep the ship running. But I don't think they need to. And I think they understand that they don't need to release a new edition to keep the ship running. Fifth edition, Teo Sabadia, Alpha Stream, has done some analyses of the sales of fifth edition books on the Alpha Stream blog lately. And basically, sales have slowed a little bit. You compare that to the way that sales slowed at the end of third edition or fourth edition or second or first edition D&D.
Yeah.
It's night and day. It is nothing like those. Fifth edition could have a long and happy tale just because of the way that Wizards has, I think, rightly understood that D&D is not just a game; it's a brand, and so the majority of their money is going to come from the brand, not the game. And I think that's why you see that a lot of the more sweeping changes that were proposed in playtesting in 1D&D have kind of been rolled back to closer to what the 2014 release of 5th edition looks like. Because a big part of this playtest is prodding at internally suspected pain points within the system and seeing, hey, players, is this a pain point to you or just us? And overwhelmingly, the feedback is, no, it's fine. No, we like it. It's
Yeah.
good. And I think a lot of people have one or two or three things that they think is the end of the world about 5th edition. Garbage game. But they'll still play it. They'll find a way to homebrew around it. They'll make it work because the rest of the game is pretty good.
Yeah, yeah.
And every person's rotten apple in the 5th edition barrel is completely different because that's the goal of modern D&D. The goal of modern D&D is to cast the widest possible net. It's to be the game for all people. It's the what's the term they use in MMOs? It's the lifetime game.
Oh yeah, yeah.
for RPG players. And I don't think that's. I'm not here to moralize on that issue. I think if you think it's good, then it's good. If you think it's bad, then it's bad. This is not an objective thing. What I think is objectively true about it is that it is good for a brand. It is good to be the fantasy RPG because that will make them a lot of money, and that will keep that ship sailing even if the tabletop RPG starts to slump.
I love this conversation. How much time do you have? I love this
We've been here for
conversation.
like an hour and a half, haven't we?
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
take it to the top of the hour.
Okay, okay. So okay, let's talk about your YouTube channel because I know you wanna talk about this. Let's get through YouTube so we can give you enough time to like let's wax and wane about or wax poetically about
Mm-hmm.
your YouTube aspirations and like your work thus far and like how are you enjoying the process and like what's that been like for you?
Yeah, well, let me give a quick rundown of what the YouTube channel is right now, and then I'll talk about what inspired it, why I did this, and we can go from there. The YouTube channel right now is I launched it last month. I put up 2 videos about 2 weeks ago. One is you are a game designer, in which I break down the core philosophy of this channel, the mission statement, the thesis, the MO of every video that will follow it, which essentially states if you have GM'd an RPG before, and I think to some people, if you've even ever played an RPG before, you have engaged in the act of game design. You have committed game design. You it might not be thoughtful game design. You might not have known it was game design, uh, but one way or another, you have done it. And if you want to do more, you can. You already have. The first and hardest step has already been taken. Now you just need to think about it deeply. And so that's the goal of the channel. It's for professionals who want to learn more about game design from the viewpoint of another professional. It's for amateurs who still have their day job and are kind of noodling away on an indie game that they want to produce, or they want to do a game jam on itch.io or something like that, and they want to hear some industry insights. And it's for people who have GM'd, who've listened to those Matt Colville videos, who think they're a pretty good GM, and who want to take their home game design to the next step. Those are the audiences I'm looking at for these videos. And I want to take them as deeply in depth and analytically as your Game Maker's Toolkits, as your Tom Scott's, as your Matt Colville's does for GMing. And I've got a handful of other inspirations in there, but I think those are the 3 that people will get right off the top. So that first video is the thesis. The second is engaging in some analysis, looking at a comparative analysis of some games out there on the market that do not use the D20 system, that don't roll a D20, add a number to it, and check to see if it exceeds a target number, right? That's a conflict resolution system for D&D and a lot of its descendants. There are games out there like Blades in the Dark that have you roll a pool of D6s and look at the highest number on any individual one of them. There's games like Burn Bright, which has you roll a pool of dice of a certain size, and you succeed if you don't roll doubles on any 2 dice, which I think is one of the most fascinating dice systems I've ever seen. There's Fantasy Flight Games 2012 Star Wars system, which uses dice with no numbers on them at all, but sort of narrativist yes and symbols that you kind of read like tea leaves to determine the narrative outcome of the results. And we gotta consider, why would a game choose to eschew the D20 system, which is so familiar and so straightforward and so effective in games like D&D? Why would they do that for a game that isn't trying to do the things that D&D is trying to do? Those are the 2 videos right now. There's going to be one that's I'm hoping will come out in the next week that looks at a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about today, actually, about how to become a professional game designer. What do you do? Why is it challenging? Where can you learn? What skills can you improve to give yourself the best chance of not, dying in the jungle while you're on the way to it? And it uses a lot of quotes, like that one from Chris Perkins that I rolled out just a few minutes ago. So that's kind of the trilogy of starting videos that covers topics of analysis, the industry, and moreover, just sort of general design precepts. And the reason I started this was we talked about this earlier, but because I don't see a lot of people who are thinking deeply about game design or who are having good conversations about game design. And that's because RPG Twitter has caught fire and fallen apart. It may be happening elsewhere. It may be happening on Discord servers that I'm not a part of. It may be happening on forums that I've never heard of. But when I was just starting in this field in 2015-ish, RPG Twitter was a beautiful sort of Arcadian place where Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford and Matt Mercer and all of these people who were deeply involved in the creation of the games and shows that you loved would just kind of wander through, and they would answer to questions that were posed to them. And I met people there. I formed a friendship with James Introcaso there, or RPG reviewers like Merrick Blackman, or creators like Sean Merwin, Teo Sabadia, all of these fantastic people who were just kind of in the same crucible together, learning how to do this thing, learning how to make games or make reviews or make videos or make actual plays that they loved, while still having a little bit of access to these kind of titans that would occasionally wander through. And that community just does not exist anymore. And it really it's devastating to me. My heart aches to think of what we lost from that time. And this is, at least in part, my own desperately optimistic attempt to try and rekindle some of that thoughtfulness, some of that quality of discourse, some of that we had at that time, and that all of the crises of the pandemic and the buyout and renaming of Twitter have kind of put to bed.
Yeah,
Um,
and
yeah,
go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to mention quickly Dice System, and I know you know a lot of Dice Systems, but have you seen Oh Captain by Leon
I just
Ber?
got my copy in the mail
Can we
yesterday.
talk about this game for at least a couple of minutes? How
Yes,
fucking great is
please.
that Dice System?
I played this game very briefly at Big Bad Con in 2022,
Hmm.
and oh my god, this game rocks. I want to do a whole video on solo RPGs. I want to talk about O Captain. I want to talk about the One Ring Strider
Hmm.
mode. I want to talk about I don't know. I need to find a bunch of solo RPGs and just like play them all because I want to talk about them. No one talks about them. I think they're so interesting. We play single player video games all the time, but we
Yeah,
never play single player RPGs in a way that gets discussed
yeah.
or broadly played. And I just I want it to happen. I want to catalyze that in some small way.
I just want to note for our listeners that James literally just like reached down and picked up Oh Captain as though this was planned. And I was
Yeah.
just like, maybe I was thinking to myself, hey, there's this great game I saw at Big Bad Con that I bought from Leon, and I'm sure James would love this, but there it is. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, and I think speaking to your comment and your general, I think, discussion about community and where it has
Mm,
gone, because it's definitely not on Twitter anymore. It's like
mm-mm,
it's kind of like there for like maybe discoverability, but
mhm,
not it's in the dumpster now. I used to love Twitter
mhm,
even a year ago. Now it's just dog shit. So
mhm.
now I think people are in Discord, and I think that's really the only place in these fractured communities that you can kind of see that sort of collaboration in those places. Unfortunately, I think that's very difficult to find people in
Yeah.
which to have those earnest conversations and like have that sort of community built around that.
Yeah, Twitter really was lightning in a bottle for RPGs because you had both the strong community and the discoverability in one place. People would see what you're talking about, they would like what you do, and they would follow you, and they would follow you to your, the work that you did, to the projects that you did. And sometime in the midst of all of that, it became algorithmically expedient to be deeply negative and toxic on there. And I've seen this complaint from a lot of creators, POC creators especially, now that I think about it. But it's only, their projects, their joy never gets traction, but their anger and their sorrow and their discourse always does. And
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe if that's the case, that's the way algorithms are headed. If hate clicks are the way of the future, then maybe the best way is to keep, the thoughtful discussion quarantined to more private servers. I have that aching nostalgia, but maybe that is the proper way. And there you go. That's what I'm trying to build here. That's the sort of creative community that I want this YouTube channel to spawn. The old maxim is never look at the YouTube comments. But I have found that for the most part, like over 99% of the comments I've received have been either kind or deeply thoughtful. I don't know if I just have the best comment section in the biz somehow, or if it's because I'm still fairly small, or what. It's probably because I'm still fairly small.
Yeah.
But so far the quality of the discourse has been fantastic over on those videos, and I think as the channel grows, it just surpassed 1,000 subscribers this week. My hope is probably to open a Discord, because just as you said, that's where the good discussion is happening. That's where people can opt into the discussion. They aren't going to get served it and have a sort of knee-jerk hot take.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that'll happen in the future. There was one other reason why I wanted to make this. Oh, yeah. This is a much less sort of highfalutin, altruistic sounding reason. This is much more personal and if I'm being totally honest, ego-driven reason. But my projects take a very long time to come out. I will be working on a book now that I'm not just a freelancer brought in kind of in the middle or the end, but starting the project from its root for 2 to 3 years. From the time the company accepts the pitch to the time it appears on store shelves, 3 years will have passed. And I will be deeply honest and vulnerable with you here. I really like it when people pay attention to me. I used to be an actor. What can I say?
As a woman with a praise kink, I totally get it. So, like and I'm being like very earnest with you, like, and for our listeners, like when I accomplish something, I message my friends and say like, "Hey, look at this thing I did," and I'm just looking for a good job. That's all I'm looking for.
Please gas me up. Yes.
I do the same. I'm the same way. I get it.
And so that length of time is insufficient. I find myself falling into these deep pits of, and I don't want to oversell this, but like anxiety and depression when I'm in the midst of a project, when, I am deep in the word mines. I can look behind me. I don't see the light of day. I look in front of me. I don't see the light of day. It's, it's dark and lonely down there.
Yeah.
And, having a sort of a relaxed but sort of consistent every 2 or 3 weeks release schedule for a YouTube video, that allows me to, channel my creativity, channel my analytical brain too, into something that comes out frequently, into something that can hit the public and get their thoughts, something that will cause a little bit of discussion to happen. And it's just satisfying to the part of me that needs that attention, that needs that to put it maybe a little bit less selfishly, that needs that engagement with my fellow humans. Because right, I don't know, girl, writing is lonely.
It is, yeah. It is very lonely. And part of that is honestly like, and part of building the team, like going back to community, and I hear you about that. And that's why my Discord is built so big now, because I've just wanted more community. I've just wanted to build more things around Pro GMs and talk to them about the business and like sort of build that, because when I first entered the Pro GM scene, it was everybody in their own silos and everybody had the fucking golden ticket. Nobody has the golden ticket in business. It's really it's very like, do this and this and this and this. And if this doesn't work, then try something else and like try to fit within your vision. And it's going to be individual to you, but like nobody's going to be able to emulate what you do really as a GM. So it's like, everybody thought that they had like the magic sauce and then they came to find out that they really didn't. So it's nice now that I have a community that's been built up and that interact with me in my Discord, and like, that where I can like put all of I have to tell somebody about this, but I can't put this on main. I have a dirty gossip channel for that reason. You know what I mean? Like, but like, I think a lot of the thing that you're talking about is like community that's been built between professionals and then aspiring professionals whom you would like to interact with more because you, as well as every other professional in the space, has had some sort of mentorship, right?
I try and give it to as many people as I can. I got it from Chris Perkins. James Introcaso got it from Chris Perkins. I mean, you don't. No man is an island here, right? If there is a self-made RPG creator, I don't know them. And that's not to discount the hard work that everyone has put in. I put in a lot of hard work. Everyone has put in a lot of hard work. But this, like I was saying, this is an industry with no centralized knowledge base. It is an industry that I think its functional knowledge largely comes from people who have freelanced with Wizards of the Coast 2 or 3 times and have borrowed their best practices when it comes to like production and management and editing and stuff like that. And I guess that's the third and maybe foremost goal of this YouTube channel is to create a central repository of game design knowledge for this field so that people who want to do this thing in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years, I hope, will be able to look back at this and say, okay, well, this is what has worked. I don't need to follow this slavishly, but I can take inspiration from this. I can see that this worked. Now I know the rules. Now I can break them in an informed way. And it feels like, to me, one of the reasons why tabletop has not exploded in the way video games have exploded, one of the ways, is because that those best practices are really hard to share, right? Video games have to be so systematized in order to function at all. You need a very strong structure in order to make them. And because everyone knows those baseline rules of game development and production and all that, they are able to iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate over and over and over and over again. But it seems like every time we make an RPG, we're reinventing the wheel. Even if we're just making a D&D clone, we got to start from square one because no one knows how to do this thing anymore. One of the reasons why Paizo made such a great D&D clone is because all of them had been working on D&D, publishing Dragon and Dungeon magazine for the last 10 years. They knew exactly what they were doing. They had received all of the briefs from Wizards. They knew the best practices, and they decided some of these best practices suck ass. We're going to change them, and we're going to do our own thing. We're going to have our own D&D with blackjack and hookers. And most other companies simply do not have that luxury. Most indies don't have that luxury. And there are very few good YouTube videos out there that give that sort of insight.
Absolutely. I think that's a great place for us to close. Thank you so much for coming on, James.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was such an amazing conversation. I'm so glad we had so long to chat about it because we went really deep on some really fantastic things.
Hi, thanks for listening. If you want to support me, you can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/isfriday, or you can find some of the work that I'm doing at vineyardrpg.com if you want to pre-order the book that we made. Thanks.